He held the power of life and death in his hands, literally. And with that power, he chose death over and over and over again. Today, we're going to break down the story of a man who became a monster, right in plain sight.
So Britain's deadliest serial killer, he wasn't some stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a trusted family doctor. We're talking about Harold Shipman, a name that just completely shattered the very foundation of the medical community. This is more than just a true crime story, It's about the ultimate betrayal of trust. I mean, what do you do when the person who's supposed to save you is the one you need saving from?
All right, Section 1, the doctor we trusted. And honestly, to really get your head around the horror of what happened, we've got to start here. We have to understand the man his community thought they knew. So let's take a look at this mask of compassion that he wore, and wore so incredibly well.
And this really captures the image he built for himself, right? In his community, a place called Hyde in Manchester, Dr. Shipman wasn't just some general practitioner. No, he was this beloved figure. He made house calls. I mean, how rare is that? It just showed this incredible dedication, especially to his elderly patients. And that earned him their absolute unwavering trust. He wasn't just their doctor. He was their friend.
Okay, Section 2, a killer's origin. Because, that whole persona, it was a mask, a really carefully constructed one. Behind it was a man shaped by trauma, by deceit, and there were early warning signs, big ones, that the system was about to fail, just tragically.
So let's look at this timeline because it reveals a couple of really critical points. First, 1963. He's just 17, and his mother, Vera, dies of lung cancer. A huge moment in any teenager's life. Then, fast forward to 1975. This is a massive red flag. He's only 5 years into his career, and he gets caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, an opioid he was addicted to. Now, he was fined, he went to rehab, but, and this is the crucial part, he was allowed to keep practicing medicine.
And that experience with his mother's death, this is where it gets really eerie. You have to understand, as a teenager, he watched doctors give his mom morphine to ease her suffering. He saw firsthand the power of these drugs. And it's believed that this really intimate experience with these powerful narcotics, well, it planted a dark seed. A seed that would, chillingly, define his method of murder years later.
I mean, look at this. This perfectly shows the two faces of Harold Shipman, right? On one side, you've got the capable, calm, professional doctor, the public image. On the other, the hidden truth, a pethidine addict, a forger of prescriptions, a total manipulator. This wasn't just some personal failing, This was the fundamental deception at the very heart of his entire life. All right, Section 3, murder in plain sight. So that leads to the big question, right? With this history of addiction and deception, how on earth did he manage to murder hundreds of people for decades, right under everyone's noses? Well, the answer is chillingly simple.
His method, his modus operandi, as they say, it wasn't complex at all. He didn't need to go stalking victims in dark alleys. Why would he? His profession was his hunting ground. It gave him the perfect cover and, even worse, direct access to the most vulnerable people in society.
Okay, so let's break down his method. His targets were almost always elderly female patients, and they were often living alone. He'd make a house call, and there, in the safety of their own home, he'd give them a lethal injection of diamorphine, which is basically medical-grade heroin. And then, the cover-up. With just the stroke of a pen, he signed the death certificate himself, listing the cause as natural causes or old age. And the final sickening touch, he'd comfort the grieving families, sometimes even show up at the funerals, just completing that whole circle of deception.
And right there, that's the heart of it. Since he was a doctor, very few people questioned his medical judgments. The entire system was built on a foundation of trust, and the very authority that gave him the power to heal, well, it also gave him the power to kill, completely without question. Because let's be honest, who suspects their doctor of being a murderer? He literally weaponized that assumption.
So, Section 4, the will that broke him. After decades of getting away with murder, what finally brought him down? It wasn't some brilliant medical detective work. Nope. It was a simple and, for him, fatal act of greed.
The whole thing started to unravel with just whispers. You had local funeral directors who started noticing, hey, there's a really high death rate among Dr. Shipman's patients.
But the real catalyst, the one thread that pulled everything apart, was a woman named Kathleen Grundy. After she died, her daughter, who just happened to be a lawyer, found a really suspicious, clumsily forged will. And guess who it left everything to? Dr. Shipman. That was the smoking gun. They exhumed Grundy's body, they found the lethal dose of heroin, and then boom! Police started reinvestigating all these other deaths, and suddenly dozens of natural causes deaths were seen in a completely horrifying new light. He was finally arrested in September of 1998.
And that brings us to Section 5, a legacy of mistrust. Honestly, the trial itself was kind of a formality, but the investigation that came after, that would uncover a scale of killing that is just, it's almost incomprehensible, and it would forever change the face of medicine in Britain.
So in court, he was convicted for 15 murders. Just 15. But the official public inquiry that followed, which was this massive deep dive into his entire career, concluded he killed at least 215 of his patients. Just let that number sink in for a second. 215 people. That makes him one of the most prolific serial killers in all of recorded history.
He was sentenced to life in prison. But in 2004, he took his own life in his cell. And here's the thing, he never confessed. He never explained why. By killing himself, he delivered one last cruel blow to the families of his victims, because he denied them any chance of ever getting answers. The ultimate question, why? It died with him.
The fallout from this was just immense. The Shipman inquiry led to a complete overhaul of the medical system in the UK. So many of the safeguards that we just take for granted now, things like needing 2 doctors to sign off on a cremation, much stricter monitoring of doctors, new ways to certify deaths, all of these reforms were born directly from his crimes. It's a terrible legacy, for sure. A healthcare system that was forever scarred, but also one that was forced to become safer.
So, at the end of the day, Shipman's story is really about a systems failure. A failure to see the monster that was hiding behind this mask of trust. And it leaves us with this really chilling, uncomfortable question. One that kind of lingers long after the headlines have faded away. How do we protect ourselves when the danger is wearing the face of someone we trust?